Hello everybody, it is I, Eternal Flame here, and today I'm here to make a video to talk about Jujutsu Kaisen's plot holes, because recently I decided to ask my channel a really interesting question from my channel post, which is if you guys think that JJK has any plot holes, and if they do, what plot holes do you think JJK has, so I can actually talk about it in a video. And that's what this video is here for today, where I'm going to talk about basically most of the comments that were posted here, whether they're plot holes, whether they're not plot holes, and try and explain them, mainly because while I do think there are some things that could look like plot holes in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, a lot of it isn't really plot holes, but more so people generally forgetting things that have already happened and been established in the world of JJK, which is what I want to talk about today. However, I also acknowledge that JJK is not a perfect series, and there is definitely going to be some plot holes that do actually exist in the series. So if you guys want to participate in this and I can make another video about this, comment down things that you think that might be JJK plot holes if it's not featured in the video. Anyways, without further ado, let's get straight into this vid. Now, our first one, which is a question more so from Purple Heart Neptune, was a question about how does Yuji insert himself into people's past like he has the Book of the End? And well, to simply answer that question, Yuji doesn't actually insert himself into people's past. It's more so the fact that in Choso's case, this is actually Choso's ability being active and not Yuji's ability. As we know from Choso, Choso carries the ability to sense when his brothers are close to the verge of death or on the verge of death. So it could also be possible that this wasn't a Choso exclusive ability, but also that Yuji had access to this ability as well, now that he was fully a death painting thanks to eating the other death paintings. Which would explain why Yuji and Choso were able to talk on the final moments of Choso before Choso had actually ended up dying. And in the case of Todo, it's literally just because Todo is insane. I kid you not, the entire reason why Todo and Yuji have that entire backstory thing is just because Todo's insane. It's not because Yuji has some special ability, which Gege had debunked early on. It's mainly just Todo is insane and Choso actually has an ability around this. Anyway, now we're going to move on to the next plot hole, which comes from Fastastic, which this plot hole is mainly questioning why are JiuJitsu Tech schools so large? This is mainly because of the fact that we barely see any students or actually sorcerers at all outside of the main cast, and in terms of student amount, there's mainly only around 9 of them, and it's extremely rare we see students outside of the schools. So how many Jujutsu sorcerers are there actually, and why haven't they appeared in the most recent battle against Sukuna? Now, in my opinion, this isn't really a plot hole, but more so because we have an extremely skewed perspective on terms of sorcerers and the mortality rate of sorcerers. Now, the reason why I say that is mainly because if you look back on previous arcs, like the JJK Zero movie, we actually see there is more than enough sorcerers to straight up go to war with over 1,000 cursed spirits back during the night parade of 100 demons when Ghetto had released over 2,000 cursed spirits in 2 separate cities. We also find out, thanks to the inverse guy that Megami and Yuji had fought a while back, that Gojo's sheer raw existence ended up making cursed spirits as a whole massively stronger. As a result of that, sorcerers and sorcerer life expectancy became much lower, and massive amounts of sorcerers ended up dying. We also know that quite a lot of sorcerers were also wiped out in the Culling games. I want y'all to remember this about Kashimo. Kashimo had over 200 points, which means he had taken out over 40 sorcerers on his own. There were other Culling game players too that had those extreme amount of points. That means they were also taking out sorcerers completely. Even Yuta Okozu had taken out 7 sorcerers before he entered into the Sendai Brawl. In Shibuya, it was basically stated by Nanami that the minimum level you had to be at in order to actually be included was at a grade 1 level, because it needs to be remembered everyone who was included there either had a massive use in terms of area control like Inumaki, or was either a grade 1 already, or was on test to become a grade 1 in the future. And the main reason for why more sorcerers haven't shown up to the Sukuna battle, it's because they are fighting against Sukuna. Yes, there's an urgency to beat Sukuna, but at the same time, a lot of the sorcerers are under the impression that Sukuna is not that much of a threat to the world itself. As Kusakabe had said himself, they could live in a world where Sukuna ended up winning, because they didn't believe that Sukuna would be the type to actually want to start the merger. Now, they were straight up wrong about that, but at the same time, a lot of sorcerers are living under that same assumption. So it would be better to not have to fight Sukuna at all rather than actually having to fight him. So if the option exists to not have to fight Sukuna at all and they don't think that Sukuna is going to end up coming for them, then why risk their lives at all? No one here has to risk their life, they all just want to risk their life in order to beat Sukuna. Now, our next set of plot holes, because it's actually a couple plot holes, comes from the Buckethead, where their first plot hole is, if Kashimo's technique isn't a binding vow, how did he live for so long? And it's a pretty simple answer. It just means that Kashimo never used his curse technique to fight anybody across the entirety of the era he was from. Which does spawn another question of how did Kashimo even know how to use his curse technique if it wasn't for the fact that we know from Choso that it's very possible to be an instinctive user of a curse technique, so it could be very possible that Kashimo was the same as Choso, and he just instinctively knew if I activate my curse technique I'm going to die. As the next one that we're going to talk about from him is the entire question of if Kenjaku can split people's souls, what's stopping him from having his brain split between two bodies? And this more so spawns a weird question in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen that we really don't know the answer to, which is what happens if Sukuna ends up incarnating in two separate people? Do both of them have two separate Sukunas? We don't really know if that's the case or not. So whether this is a plot hole or not, we don't really know, mainly because we don't know enough about how splitting souls functions and whether you can actually have two separate consciousness in two separate people or not. Though this could also explain if Kenjaku does ever end up coming back, it could be because of that, because he basically pulled the Sukuna. We don't really know, but it could be possible. We just don't know enough about how it functions yet or not to call it a plot hole or not. And the final mention of a plot hole from them is about the Black Flash, and how when you are actually engraving the ability to use it in your body, and basically trying to force a Black Flash, doesn't that mean you are using the Black Flash at will? And the simple answer is yes and no. You are able to do things that will make it more and more likely for you to land a Black Flash, but that doesn't guarantee that you are going to land a Black Flash just because you are trying to will it. It doesn't mean you can do it at will, just that you can increase your chances in actually landing a Black Flash. Now the next plot hole on the list actually comes from chapter 200 when Kenjaku was showing the US Army guys about how good sorcerers are, and it shows Nanami, Todo, Gojo, and Sukuna in Yuji's body, which all seems pretty normal until you see that it was in February 2018, which is a few months before Yuji eats the finger. And he was 100% right about that, because I immediately went back to check to make sure this was the case or not, and they are very much right. Especially considering the footage came from Mechamaru that was healed by Mahito's idol transfiguration. So yeah, this is just straight up a plot hole. Like, there's no easy way to put it. It is a plot hole. It does not make sense at all. It's more likely just Gege made a timeline error, but yeah, no matter what you say, it's still a plot hole. Now the next plot hole we're going to talk about is the infamous Mach 3 speed, which comes from Naoya, and there are several ways to approach this plot hole. Number one, you could say that the narrator only meant that as Naoya's travel speed and this wasn't actually his combat speed, or you could just say every character has gotten wildly faster than Mach 3, which is something Gege actually kind of supports inside of another interview. Or you can say most of JJK happens around the Mach 3 range, or somewhere close to the Mach 3 range, or above it, or below it. It doesn't really matter, but there are several ways to actually explain away this one, and this isn't really a plot hole in my opinion. Now up next was them not telling Yuji about Todo, but they did tell him about Maki coming up behind him to stab Sukuna. And it might actually be the case that Yuji just didn't know about this at all, mainly because of something that was established that Yuji had no idea about Yuta's plan, which means he was just somehow fighting perfectly in sync with Yuta and just knew what to do perfectly. Which makes sense now that I think about it, considering the way Yuji's able to fight and in sync perfectly with Todo, so Yuji being able to do that with Yuta and just figure out what to do from there makes a lot of sense. With, of course, the main reason why they didn't know was because Todo was afraid of the potential that Sukuna might end up getting information from Yuji because of the entire soul resonance thing between Yuji and Sukuna. Now that guess ended up being incorrect because Sukuna had no idea how they cheated, but there was still a potential of that happening, which Todo did not want to risk. Now up next for the next plot hole we're going to talk about is one that's talking about what was Gojo doing during Season 1. He was almost never present for most of the important missions, and that is mainly because of Gojo's teaching style, as this is something that needs to be remembered about Gojo and his teaching style. The way that he teaches his students is basically by throwing them into the fire and seeing if they can evolve or not. Usually in controlled spaces, however it doesn't always seem to be the case. For example, how Yuji ended up dying because Sukuna had taken his heart, and then Yuji taken back control when Sukuna no longer had the heart. And specifically in Goodwill, they made sure to go out of their way to make a barrier that Gojo would not be able to enter without actually needing to put pressure into breaking, which he did eventually break and ended up helping with the arc and trying to put down Hanami. Keyword trying, but hey, he ended up making up for it later in Shibuya. And then the next plot hole we're going to talk about is the whole entire thing about the 1 in a million vessel rule, and more so if this was just for Sukuna specifically as a cursed object, or all cursed objects because of all the incarnated players and death paintings. Now, I do want to talk about this first. The reason why there are so many incarnated players as well as the death paintings existing is all because of Mahito. As a lot of people actually do forget about this, that a lot of people have their souls transfigured by Mahito in order to have vessel-like bodies. They are not natural-born vessels. Same way that Yuji was not a natural-born vessel as well. The reason why Yuji works as a vessel was because he was born with a finger sealed inside of him. The literal only person we know that is an actual vessel that is a natural vessel is Megumi Fushiguro himself. And maybe Hana Kuresu, but we're not as sure about that one. But Megumi Fushiguro for sure. Now, while this could be the case for vessels, it also could be possibly the case for just Sukuna in general, mainly because of the fact that Sukuna is referred to as a lethal poison, so you need to become immune to it. So only 1 in a million people who aren't soul altered or born with a Sukuna finger inside of them would actually be able to handle being a vessel. So this isn't really a plot hole, more so people forgetting that a lot of the incarnated vessels, as well as the death paintings, are all existing because of Mahito, someone who would very intentionally alter their bodies in order to make sure they could handle being vessels. And even if it was for Sukuna in specific, it could be because Sukuna is a poison. So basically there are 2 answers for it either way. Now the next plot hole that we are going to talk about is the entire plot hole of how did Yuta manage to get to Shinjuku so fast, because it's not been confirmed if he had ever copied Ui Ui or Gojo's teleportation technique. So the simple answer is Ui just teleported him, and we never saw Ui actually teleport him in, and just when Yuta appeared. The main reason why we know this is mainly because of the fact that Yuta did not have the ring on, which meant Rika was not manifested, so unless you think Yuta ended up manifesting Rika for 5 minutes before he even arrived to the battlefield, which I very heavily doubt, as well as a lot of other people very heavily doubt, then yeah, just Ui off-screen teleported him. Now the next plot hole we're going to cover is one of the more interesting plot holes in my opinion, which is the plot hole of how did Kenjaku get a hold of Ghetto's body if Gojo was the only one that buried him somewhere only he knew. And there are actually a couple answers for how this could have been the case. Number 1, Gojo handed off the body more than likely to Shoko for it to be discarded properly, so it could have been Kenjaku actually stole it during that proper amount of time. And something else to be remembered, because this is also very important, Kenjaku had control over quite a bit of the higher-ups. We actually find this out back during the Sakurajima colony when Kenjaku is basically bragging over to Kamo and basically telling Kamo that there's nothing he could do and that he had control over the higher-ups for a while. So Kenjaku more than likely used that control over the higher-ups in order to figure out where the body was. Either that or he just was wandering around for a long while and just picked up the body naturally in the year's time. Either way, it was basically Gojo's fault for not properly discarding the body. And now for the final plot hole we're going to cover in this video, which is the plot hole of how did Sukuna know the hand sign to do the world cutting slash if this was the first time he had done it, and Mahoraga had never done that hand sign, so how did Sukuna know? And the answer more than likely is a pretty simple one. It was just pure raw instinct. As we find out in Jujutsu Kaisen, quite a lot of jujitsu is actually pure raw instinct, so it could very well be the case that he just instinctually knew he had to do the hand sign. Either that or he specifically created that move with that hand sign in mind in order to lower the amount of curse energy to actually make it possible through binding vows. And that's what all the plot holes we have for this specific video. Comment down any plot holes I might have missed and I can cover in a sequel to this video. Anyways, I'm gonna see y'all later. Peace out, have a good day.